It's the North Yorkshire Educational Services NES Digital EdTech Show 2021. So I'm sharing about lessons from lockdown and ideas around where and how you can take your next steps in your online learning journey during this session. I'm just going to keep a little eye on the time, make sure I don't go over. That's always important, isn't it? If you don't know me, my name's Mark, and I taught for a little while. I'm associated with independent thinking, and I blog a little bit. I've written a few books and a few guides and things over the years as well. And I'm pretty agnostic when it comes to teaching and learning with technology. It doesn't really matter too much, really, what sort of devices and ecosystems you choose to use. In a Bananarama world, it ain't so much what you do, it's the way that you do it that gets results. And so that's something that I share an awful lot around that, because it's a thinking that's important. During the course of the pandemic, for many of us, were really thrown in at the deep end. And during this session today, and we're going to be exploring and thinking about where and how you might have moved along with your confidence in using technology over the course of the last sort of 12 to 15 months as well. And for some reason, I'm an independent thinking associate twice on that list. But the reason why I share these sort of things is because I think it's important to come from education where you're talking and sharing about education. That's why I love the work of Pobble, who we're sharing later on today. A fantastic technology solution born out of the ideas of teachers, still run by teachers. It's a fantastic initiative and product for education. So what am I going to cover during the course of this session today? Well, we're going to look at what evidence is available. Clearly, we might have talked about or looked at in isolation some of the things that work in education when it comes to teaching and learning with technology, but nothing's really thrown us in a deep end like the pandemic has. And so there's been a number of reports that have come out, and I'll share some of those with you, and some other bits and bobs related to what works during the course of this session. Going back to that Bananarama principle, really digital strategy is really key to your success with technology. Those schools that had a strong digital strategy in place prior to the pandemic really were able to hit the ground running compared to those who really hadn't. So we're going to have a little think about those sort of things, and I've got a resource to share with you that might help you and support you with your thinking around that. Now is the time really to be reflecting back. That's why we had the session with local head teachers. We did have one senior leader join us from Abu Dhabi, Ollie Lewis, on that conversation. And it's great to see those quotes being shared in a little introduction there at the beginning of the session today. And then wrapping up at the end, I'll be sharing a few tools and ideas to support teaching and learning that you might like to sort of take away and think about using in the classroom yourselves. But, you know, I've been teaching, or I taught for many years, and there was always this promise of technology. And so, you know, we asked the question, are we nearly there yet? And so it's a bit like my children in the car when we're driving to see their grandmother. Not so much these days, although now we're back open again, we've managed to go and see her. But they always want to know, how far is it now? Are we nearly there? All these sort of things. And I'm sure you have the same sort of experience. Even if you don't have your own children, you'll know a bit from your school trips and things. But that was one of the conversations we had when we were discussing the reflection on the year since lockdown. And I've got something that John Tate, Team Tate on Twitter, shared on LinkedIn not long after the reflection session here as well, later on in his presentation. But I want to get some feedback from you from the outset, please. Could you just now go to menti.com, if you could, please? And I'm keen to sort of learn one thing from the outset. There are two questions, and by all means, if you want to go ahead and try and answer the second question, go for it. But I won't be sort of sharing the results of that one until a little bit later on. But there are many ways to do things with technology. So if you could just go to menti.com and then use that code that's displayed on the screen there, 80605574, and just pop a little response into there. To assist with that, I'm just going to jump myself now into Chrome here and come out of my Twitter feed and jump into Mentimeter. And the instructions are on the screen again here. If you look, use the code 80605574. What have been your favourite EdTech tool to use over the course of the last sort of 12 months or so? Fantastic. And what's nice about some of these that are coming up straight away, things like Padlet and Jamboard, Google Sites, what's great about these sorts of tools is that they are a low threshold for learning how to use them, but really scalable in terms of what you can do with them. Loom, again, a fantastic tool for recording your screen. Google Meet, Teams, as to be expected. We've got Kahoot. I suspect there'll be a few more fantastic. A few more assessment for learning or sort of low stakes quizzing tools in there as well. We've got, say, a few screen recorders, a few sort of workflow solutions like Teams, Classroom, Seesaw. Seesaw's been huge in primary over the last 12 months. My own youngest son was using it during lockdown himself, his older brother using Teams. Ability Pobble 365 in there as well. Code.org, a fantastic place to get resources, ideas, teaching and learning resources around the teaching of computing. Some fantastic tools. Something we find, and we haven't got time to sort of go into it today, but when it comes to you're thinking about technology, asking the question, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze, is always a good thing to try and think. So I think some of these tools like Kahoot, Mote, a fantastic tool. Mote, I'll mention that later on. Jamboard and Padlet, you know, that low entry point doesn't require much in the way of training for your students to sort of get into it and use it. I've used tools like Padlet with children as young as year 1 right through to A-level students of my own in year 13. They're a fantastic tool. Well, thank you so much for your feedback there. Keep those going. We'll share the final sort of word cloud later on. You might want to leave the subsequent question until a bit later on, because that's linked to something I'm going to be sort of sharing and discussing with you at that point in time. But thank you for your feedback there. Quizzes, again, brilliant low stakes quizzing tool. One of my absolute favourites there. Sway for presenting presentations in an innovative and interesting way, a bit different to PowerPoint. And Google Slides, brilliant stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all of those. Right. So what we've seen is the pace of change over the years hasn't been that great when it comes to using technology for learning. Sure, you might feel like these guys on the Rossa ride at Ferrari World, 0 to something like 180 miles an hour in something like 3 seconds. It feels like you're flying along really quickly, but the reality before COVID was actually a little bit more like this. But COVID really dropped us in all at the deep end, and whether we wanted to or not, we had to start taking on and developing our digital skills. It's been a huge growth in confidence and competence in teachers and leaders in their use of technology over the course of the past 12 months and more. And so, bless her, that poor child coming down that slide never fails to make me laugh. But yeah, it's been a really crazy ride in many words, as my own son would call it, though he would call it cramazing, because children love to use technology. It can be hugely engaging. It can be far more inclusive for many children as well. And so it's been, a bit crazy, but also amazing to have the opportunity to use new technologies. In terms of what the evidence says around teaching and learning with technology, not long after we went into lockdown, the Education Endowment Foundation released their rapid evidence assessment. They went through and pulled out loads and loads of reports and explored things around remote teaching and learning, blended learning, collaborative learning using computers, computer-assisted instruction, games for learning, all sorts of stuff. And they brought some really fantastic directions as well for school to take. By using an evidence-informed approach, schools were able to sort of then focus on the areas that were likely the best bets on what would be the things that would have the most impact. So, trying to embed things like student-to-student interaction, and trying to blend not just asynchronous but synchronous, so that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and there's a bit of flexibility built into those things as well. Around blended learning, it was highlighted that lack of access to technology and that digital divide was hugely impactful in terms of all students being able to access the curriculum and learning and teaching materials. And obviously, providing professional development opportunities is super important. It's been great to see the hard work of George Tyson and the rest of the team at NES in supporting schools with their professional development and professional learning around teaching and learning with technology. Computer-supported collaborative learning showed that there were some apparently positive impacts on learning outcomes as well. Mostly reviewed in STEM and language lab type scenarios with language learning, but again, it can have an impact, and the report from the EAF, Education Development Foundation, really again helped to drive thinking for those teachers and leaders who weren't too sure about, WAGOL, what a good one looks like, helping you direct your approaches. Computer-assisted instruction was discussed in the report as well, but again, it doesn't tell you how to do it. It sort of says that the approaches that are likely to be your best bets for how things will actually work for you inside your school, should you try to employ or deploy some of these approaches and ideas. I'd say they went on to think about games for learning, and they said that some evidence that games that are well suited to remote learning have particular characteristics such as additional scaffolding or detailed feedback. So if you think about tools like Sensory Tech, the AI in the product will examine how students are getting on, then provide next steps and scaffolding around areas of misconception. Really helpful for teachers, being the guide on the side rather than having to be the sage on the stage, because delivery is again particularly difficult when you're working remotely with young people. And so it's really helpful to know, again, or have an idea at least about what your best bets are about what will work for you under these circumstances. So if I summarise those key points from those different areas, the key takeaway for me, and this has always been the case really, actually, when I did a deployment in a school back in 2011, we were one of the first schools to do iPad one-to-one, but we put away about as much time as we could in terms of and finance a way to support professional learning as we put into the project itself for the actual technology, because without providing rich, frequent, timely, helpful professional learning and training opportunities, teachers aren't going to use the equipment or the ideas or the tools that you're providing them with. We've seen that over the years. We saw the huge flop that was interactive whiteboards back in the day. And the key driver for these things not working has been that lack of professional learning around it, the opportunity to learn how to use it in ways which will be impactful and doable. And then again, ensuring access, equity of access was so important, and it was great to see how many schools and communities came together to support access to technology. And sometimes it wasn't the actual hardware, it was things like data, providing Wi-Fi dongles and that sort of thing for homes as well. So some fantastic takeaways here. If you want to see the full report, there's a nice little vanity link down the bottom which will take you through to where you can find all of that information that I've shared with you there. And I've tried to sort of share those these vanity links throughout the whole presentation today, so please feel free to take those and go and explore them further. But the key action points from that report really, again, provide plenty of timely and rich and relevant professional learning, provide scaffolding for learners, recognising that it's not just the teachers who are learners, but the students themselves, and ensure the equity of access for all of your school community. Provide opportunities for peer-to-peer interaction and for students to work independently. There are plenty of tools that can really support the teacher being that guide on the side, patrolling the classroom, supporting them. Things like Classroom.cloud has been a really popular product during the lockdown, particularly because it was given away free for schools during the lockdown. But it means that you can still support your learners, see their screens, or those sort of things as you're working in the classroom yourself, but students are remote or down the hallway or those sorts of things. And sharing within your school community. John Hattie says about the importance of collective teacher efficacy. And one of the ways you can do that is by having conversation about what is working in your school, because it's all very well and good. I'm a big fan of using Twitter, but just because one thing works in another school doesn't mean to say it will necessarily work in your school. It might not fit in with your budget, it might not fit in with your infrastructure, your ecosystem. So talking with your colleagues about what's working in your school is a great way of trying to get that working in your own classroom if it's a new thing for you that you haven't tried before. So where can you go to find out more about these sorts of things, about sort of evidence-informed approaches, or to get some training? was a great report released earlier this year, around about the time that Bet would have been on, actually, from Ofsted, their What's Working Well in Remote Education document. And it's a really great document, not too long, but as you can see, the content's down here on the left-hand side. Messages that I regularly share, and you'll see some of these in my presentation today, but things like keeping it simple, and feedback, and the importance of things like retrieval practice and assessment and engagement being really important, and making sure that you try and have that. As it says, live lessons aren't always the best, and that goes back to that research from the Education Endowment Foundation, when they talk about asynchronous and synchronous approaches being the best approach to make things work and for access and equity. A little bit later in the month, in January, Ofsted also released their research. They've been doing some research in schools, and again, that keeping it simple message sort of ran right through the whole of the documentation, and it was a great document. It's much longer, this one, loads more depth, some great case studies and ideas, and I definitely suggest that you have a good look at this document if you're looking for some more ideas about what would work for you in your situation, in your setting. There are lots and lots of examples in there, and tools are mentioned as well, which I think is quite useful as well, given that some tools may get sign-ups and things from them sharing this sort of thing, but I think it's useful to have a frame of reference to sort of refer back to. Cat Scut as well, and so this was done quite a little while ago, but Cat Scut put together some research reviews on the Chartered College site, and I think that's an open document rather than one behind the paywall, although as a fellow of the Chartered College and teaching myself, I would strongly recommend getting involved. The opportunities for professional learning through some of their courses and the resources that are available, and their Impact magazine are fantastic for helping keeping you on top of what's current and relevant and best practice in teaching and learning, with or without technology. It's a fantastic organisation to be involved with. But going back to this idea of it not being it not being so much what you do, is the way that you do it, that Bananarama principle. How do you go about doing these things? How do you make technology work in your schools? Well, for me, I think it's really important that we have a culture that's built around a digital strategy. It's something which, you would have a strategy around all sort of new or slight changes into things you might be bringing into your school, whether you're bringing in a new school uniform or a new curriculum or a new qualification, GCSE pigeon studies, whatever it is. It's a cultural and a change management thing, and having a strategy for that is absolutely paramount and absolutely key in order for it to be successful. On this next slide, I'm going to sort of go through some things that I've sort of brought together from unpicking the evidence reports, and I use this as a framework for reflecting when I'm working with schools to help them think and reflect on how things are working, and to help sort of guide based upon some of those best bets from the rapid evidence assessment and other documents. But it's really key to be having consistent approaches. So, for example, if we saw some workflow solutions on Mentimeter before, we saw things like Seesaw and Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams and so forth and so on. But you wouldn't want to have Teams in one class and then Seesaw in another class and then Classroom in another class, and learners having to, I'm thinking in secondary here, but having to move from one lesson to the next, having to learn about different approaches to how content was being shared and delivered and all those different things. Having a consistent approach can really help to make things work en masse. It might work well for one particular class or one particular teacher. If you're looking for the whole school to move on that journey, consistency is absolutely key. We've discussed already the importance of having both synchronous and asynchronous opportunities, making sure that what you share is accessible. Sometimes that's around access to technology, sometimes that's around actually making sure that the content you provide is accessible. Do your learners have any additional learning needs, for example, that need to be addressed or supported through the ways in which you're sharing learning with your students? Involving parents is something which, again, is super important, and one of those quotes from the reflections was from the head teachers sort of discussion back on the anniversary back last month was around how the pandemic has really brought conversations between home, child and school so much closer. And again, the research from Hattie and others shows that can be a hugely impactful thing on student progress, and it was absolutely paramount in supporting learner progress during the pandemic. Access to Wi-Fi, data, infrastructure to make sure students can get onto platforms and onto Teams or whatever it is that you're using, again, was absolutely key. We've talked about the importance of CPD. Something I'll add into here as well, I think it's really important that we measure what we do. What are the improvements? What are the benefits? Has this initiative actually been successful? Because if we don't do that, then we don't know whether we've actually been successful or not. And then the final one is attendance, making sure this is the engagement part, really, engaging learners in attending lessons, turning up, completing work, those sorts of things. That all ties into the parental conversations and things as well. And what we found generally was those schools that had these sorts of approaches during the pandemic and during lockdown had some semblance of ongoing success. What this diagram shows, though, is that if we take some of these things out, then we start to see some issues occurring. So if you're not ensuring engagement and attendance, then students will obviously have knowledge gaps, a big conversation, and certainly something which is being given a lot of thought and attention with the NTP, the National Tutoring Programme. There are lots of opportunities for schools to tap into some tutoring options through that. But if students that attend, they have knowledge gaps. If you don't measure, then you don't know that you've been successful. If you don't provide CPD, then staff are anxious and won't use the technology. If students don't have access to it, then there's inequality. If you don't communicate with parents, there's no support. Parents don't know what to do, how to do it. If the work isn't accessible, then obviously it's inaccessible. If things aren't have a blend of synchronous and asynchronous, then there's no equality there. And what if a family only has one device between 3 children? You can't expect all children to be online having a live lesson all day, every day with that sort of access. And then things aren't consistent, then that sort of brings confusion. So using that top line as a benchmark for thinking about your approaches has proven to be really popular and useful. So how can you go about doing these sort of things? How can you bring about a digital strategy? Well, it should be led by teachers and senior leaders in terms of your outcomes and your context. And it's really important to sort of take on board all those key areas with teachers and students at the heart of what you're doing. So providing that training and CPD, involving the senior leadership team and your school's development plan, thinking about the finances involved and whether you can afford it and how you can go about affording these things. Bringing on board your trustees and governors, working closely with your network admins and managers, making sure things are safe. So you're doing your DPIAs, your data protection impact assessments. There's so much to think of and so many people to consider when you're bringing on board your digital strategy. But if you consider all of these different things again, then it's likely that you'll have some success. Now, these areas that I'm showing you here form part of a digital strategy document that I created with a guest on the panel later on, Al Kingsley. We highlighted there that you need a digital strategy because, one, it will give you an idea of what you're wanting to achieve and why. It identifies who your key stakeholders are, so you can have a joined up approach. It means that you can actually build in realistic timeframes. Sometimes that's linked to finance, sometimes that's linked to professional learning and professional development, where your staff are in terms of their confidence in using these technologies. There are many things to consider. It also helps you not sort of spending your budget in the wrong areas as well. So you'll know what journey you're taking and where you're trying to get to and all those things. And it will help you to ensure that your impact can be measured. If you want to find out more about that document, simply just go to schooldigitalstrategy.com. You can download the guide that's there completely for free. It covers all those areas I've just been talking about. I say there's case studies in there as well. Ollie Lewis, that I mentioned before, who was a guest on the Head Teachers Roundtable conversation a few weeks ago, has got a case study in there from his school, British International School of Abu Dhabi. There are schools from around the world sharing their digital strategies and ideas in there, not just from the Middle East, but obviously from the UK and other places from around the world as well. So you simply go to schooldigitalstrategy.com and you can download that. And we've recently released a new version of that, version 3 actually. Just take on board some of the sort of things around collaboration and communication that have been so key again during the pandemic. So about teaching and learning. Well, here are a few strategies based upon the research again. Keep it simple. I've said that, and reinforced by what Ofsted have said, and from the EAF and others. And make good use of those assessment tools as well. The pandemic saw us see an increase in the sort of flipped learning model, and there's this idea of flipping the flip as well, asking your learners to sort of create those flipped learning resources to help them show what they know, but also then to be used to quiz and test their peers as well. Those sort of things are really useful for retrieval practice activities as well. And I've got a few tools around retrieval practice to share with you later on as well. What we've learned from the research as well too around cognitive load is to try and chunk information. So, you know, this I'll just move on to the next part of it. I could have started this slide like this, but like one of the reports from the Education Endowment Foundation talks about how tools such as presentation tools like I'm using right now can be used in better ways to help focus that cognitive load. So, you know, using simple animations, so things come in one by one like this, rather than having all that text on the screen, again, will really help direct and focus that load. Ideas around dual coding as well, so using related icons. You can see I've got some related icons next to each of these points here on my slides as well. And so I'm trying to dual code, I'm trying to reduce cognitive load, and you can sort of take on board these sorts of ideas too. Voice feedback has been huge as well. I think that's, you know, a fantastic way of actually sharing and giving feedback to your learners. Not only can you say more in a shorter period of time than it would take you to actually handwrite things, it's far more accessible too. I'll always remember a dyslexic student that I had who sent me his A-level computing coursework. He was dyslexic, as I mentioned, and rather than spend my time scribbling my notes and comments and things across his sort of 30-40 sides of A4 in his coursework, what I did was I put it into Explain Everything, which is an iPad tool. You can use it on other platforms, but I brought the document into there and I recorded little bits of audio feedback throughout the documents. And it was lovely when his mum called me the next day saying how excited he'd been to have feedback that he could actually access and could understand and make improvements from. And we've seen that hugely have an impact, leaving that audio feedback during the pandemic. Tools like Seesaw, OneNote Class Notebook, all sorts of things have lots of great tools there. For recording audio, so you can leave that verbal feedback for your learners. It's also good for reducing workload too, because you can get through the marking that much more quickly than you otherwise could. But this quote from Fullen is a bit of a North Star for me. Sure, you know, it's important to maintain budget, make sure the infrastructure is there, make sure that your Active Directory is up to date, all these different things that technicians and network managers and admins have to make sure are in place. Obviously, it's really important to have the conditions for success in place. But with my teacher hat on, you know, the use of technology should be driven by your thinking around teaching and learning. The tail shouldn't really wag the dog if we can make it so. I often share about PCK, you know, that idea of pedagogical content knowledge, where we bring together good teaching and learning being where we bring together what we know about teaching and learning, what we know about our subjects, and bringing that together. And a real North Star again for me is that development of PCK into TPAC, where we try and bring in and think about that in that sweet spot in the middle. Yes, we're trying to teach this content. Yes, this is how we're going to approach teaching it. Can technology bring something to the mix? If it can, then great. If it can't, then don't use it. That's the great thing about TPAC. It's not advocating for more use of technology. It's advocating for you thinking about the best uses of technology. And that's something that's been, again, a real North Star for me. And if you've seen me present before, you may well have heard me talk about the importance of that as an idea behind what you're doing. And there's a great, a popular infographic that I made available on my website, ICTevangelist.com, if you want to explore that in more detail and share that with your colleagues at school as well for their thinking around it. And the quote from Kohler and Mishra there at the bottom, reinforcing that message that it's not about using more technology. They say TPAC is truly meaningful, deeply skilled teaching with or without, because sometimes this can be the best choice, technology. So it's super important to sort of keep that framework in mind, I think, when it comes to what you're choosing to do with your use of technology in schools. So my next question for you really is how far have you come on your remote learning journey? John Tate, I mentioned before, Team Tate on Twitter, he put this message post onto LinkedIn a month ago, around about the time of our conversation, and as you can see, on the anniversary of remote learning. And this chart here sort of developed from the work of Mandan and Klein. Sort of talks about how we can move from sort of being at survival through to mastery, where you've had some training, you're feeling more confident, through to using technology effectively, it's embedded in your lessons and being used where appropriate, through to your technologies being pervasive and all these different things here. So my next question to you really, which is on the Mentimeter, so if you just want to return back to there for a second, I'll just jump back to here as well myself. Maybe you'll still have it open on your device. My next question on this was, where would you rank yourself 1 to 4 on that scale? Given your starting point last February, March to where you are now, would you see yourself still at survival, at mastery, at impact, at innovation? Where would you see yourself as being? So this is the image again, if you need to refer back to it. So are you still kind of at survival? Are you at mastery, impact, innovation? Where are you feeling that you are along that scale? There's some great feedback coming through there, and what's lovely is, if I would have asked this question a year ago, so many people will have actually ticked the survival box, and I don't think anybody has as of yet with that feedback. And certainly feeling like you've got mastery of these things at this point in time is great. So what can we do to build upon these? What are the next steps? Where can we go next with all of these things? Thank you so much for your responses on that question there. I really appreciate that. Because the thing is, for some people, technology can be a little bit like, magic. My own children, they're quite a bit older now, but when I was younger, when they were younger, sorry, I was younger too, less grey hair. But I used to have them using a great augmented reality app called Quiver. You could print out worksheets and you colour them in, and when you held your iPad over the top, whatever you'd coloured in on this sheet would come to life, and it would do all sorts of things, from dance to have a globe that you'd coloured in, a flat map of the earth, and then it would come up and be coloured in. And my children loved it. They didn't realise they were learning about things, and they would say, "Daddy, can we do the magic?" They were just so inspired by these different sort of fantastic augmented reality technologies. But it's the same for many teachers. When technology is sufficiently advanced enough, it is indistinguishable from magic, as Arthur C. Clarke said here. So what can we do to make it less so? Well, again, it goes to that regular, relevant, timely uses and around training and CPD. But sometimes we can go a little bit over here as well. I'm the first person to be an advocate for technology. I absolutely love technology. I mean, you're not going to meet somebody who's much more geeky than me, from my Apple Watch to my microphone that I've got here, to my headphones, to my other MacBook. I love technology, but just because you can do something with technology doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And so again, VR and AR are fantastic tools for learning and teaching. They're incredibly immersive and really, really engaging. But just because you can do those things, again, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it going to help you in some of the key areas that you're looking for those impacts? Again, just because you can do these things doesn't necessarily mean that you should. A great report from the Education Endowment Foundation was this one, which came out in March 19, using digital technology to improve learning. And they had 4 sort of key recommendations inside that document. The first one was to consider how technology will improve teaching and learning before introducing it. For many, dropped in at a deep end at the start of the pandemic. That was a bit sort of previous, that one, but certainly the next 3 are really helpful. So it can be used to improve the quality of explanations and modelling, doing things like I'm doing now, using Magic Move in Keynote, but you can do the same thing in Morph to draw people into separate images, parts of an image, rather than showing the whole thing at once. You can use it for pupil practice, so that's low stakes quizzing, retrieval practice, all those things there. And improving assessment and feedback, and we talked about that a little bit before, didn't we, with the verbal feedback things as well. But I break these things down into sort of 3 key areas really. When it comes to your thinking around teaching and learning with technology, ask yourself sort of 3 questions. Is what I'm trying to do going to enhance learning? Is it going to either support my teaching, or is it going to speed up some of my processes? So if it isn't going to tick at least one of these 3 boxes, not all tools and activities will, but if it isn't going to help you in one of these sort of 3 key areas, then I would argue, you know, is the juice worth a squeeze? Is it worth you using that technology to support what you're doing with your role in the classroom? So yeah, having those 3 sort of key things in place can be really, really helpful. So go back to that idea of verbal feedback, a few tools to support around that sort of thing. We've heard about Moat already today, and OneNote class notebook, again a fantastic way to leave audio feedback. Moat can be used in Google Schools. You can leave audio clips and things on, if you're a school using iPads, you can leave feedback on those sort of things in Seesaw and Shobi. You can leave audio feedback on pages and numbers and keynote documents. There are loads of opportunities here for supporting that idea around verbal feedback. There are lots of tools that can support oracy as well. I'm a big fan of Adobe Spark Video. If I just jump across to here, we should see an example of an entrepreneurial advert made by some students in year 5, I think.
So we're in TW and we are interested in selling you a t-shirt. Our designs are unique, the material's soft and everyone loves it. The t-shirt is blue with white writing and a red heart. It comes in lots of different sizes. To find out more about our t-shirt, come to TW's classroom.
And it can also be used to explain things as well. This is a piece of work completed by my own son. In year 5, he'd been learning remotely about the Earth and the Sun in lockdown, and he used Spark Video to make this short video about what he learned.
Hello, my name is Dougie Anderson, and here is my presentation about the Earth and the Sun. Rotating is when something spins around on its own axis, such as the Earth, which makes one complete rotation on its axis every day. Orbiting is when something goes around something, such as a satellite going around the planet Earth.
So you don't need to see the whole video there, but you know, there was so much work behind the scenes to actually get to this point here. He had to write a script, he had to learn the keywords, he practiced his script, he didn't read it when he did it. There's so much learning that can happen, and if we think about the work of School 21 and the Voice 21 initiatives, oracy is so huge and can have an impact on learning for our students in so many ways, and tools that are so simple and easy to use and free to education like Adobe Spark Video can be hugely helpful in supporting those sorts of activities. I mentioned retrieval practice and low stakes quizzing as well, and lots of tools, and some of these were mentioned in the word cloud on Mentimeter before, but there are so many tools that can help us, from quizzes to Microsoft Forms to Google Forms to Kahoot to Quizlet. There are loads and loads of them, but again, what I would say to you is when you're thinking about your choice in these tools that to try and support your retrieval practice in the classroom, try and make them consistent. Overloading children with lots of different platforms can be confusing in and of itself. I'd also argue to try and use tools that don't have much of a competitive element. Low stakes quizzing is exactly that, low stakes. If you're using a tool like Kahoot where questions are on a timer, everyone's moving through at their own speed, yes, you can change those features in Kahoot. So please think carefully about how you do it, because again, in a Bananarama world, it isn't so much what you do, it's the way that you do it that's important, and that's what gets results. As we get towards the end of my session, I want to share some resources with you as well to help you with what you're making and doing in the classroom. So I worry about teachers when I ask in schools, where do you get your images from or your icons from? Many will say just Google Images, but many will not then say, yes, I tick the box to make sure they're copyright free. So sites like the Noun project, where you can get royalty-free icons to use in your projects, image websites and Splash and Pixabay. are fantastic resources, again, where you can access loads of royalty-free images. Pixabait's got videos as well, and vector graphics and clip art and things. You might even want to try some AI. Go to autodraw.com. You can start to sketch, and this works on your phone or using your mouse on a laptop if you want to, or an actual mouse if you're using a desktop. But you start to draw out the icon you're trying to create, and then the AI tries to recognize it and then gives you what they think the best bet for that is at the top there. You can see it, you can choose it, and then you can just download that icon that you've created yourself using autodraw.com if that's something that you'd find useful. And not just for our students, but ourselves as well. Try and keep a track on your screen times. Not all screen time is bad, but try and keep an eye on these sorts of things. And remember that 20-20-20 rule as well. Every 20 minutes, try and spend 20 seconds focusing on something 20 feet away. It'll help to reset your eyes and avoid some of these ideas that people have and things that, where your vision can be impaired. So use screen time. Use the tools that are available to you, your calendar. Use your do not disturb. I've got do not disturb turned on now on my device here and on my phone, so that I'm not disturbed by anybody while I'm delivering this presentation. I'm involved in the conference today. So use these tools to help you. It's so important, but try and, as I say, keep things as simple as you can in all that you try and do. And ask yourself the question, is the EdTech you're going to be used worth the effort? Ask yourself some simple questions. Is it easy to use? Is it like the Padlets of this world and Jamboards that we heard of earlier on, where they're low entry but massively scalable in terms of what you can actually do with them for teaching and learning? Is there depth of challenge in the thing that you're trying to use with your learners? Is it going to really support all those different things? Is it accessible? Is it going to work on all the devices that your learners will have access to? What will it cost be? Is there any sort of data privacy or other concerns around its use and things as well? And then ultimately, will it have a positive impact on their learning or your teaching? Ask yourself, is it just a gimmick? Is it worth the efforts? Or as I said before, is the juice worth the squeeze? So that's getting me towards the end of my presentation. I just want to remind you that idea on keeping things nice and simple, please. There are lots of resources available through the presentation that I've shared here. And if you've got any questions about things that I've shared during the presentation today, please do feel free to ask me in the chat. You may well have done already. I'll come back in a second and see if there have been any questions. But if you're interested in doing some work with me, then please do drop me a line. I don't do drive-by sessions as well, so if you've got any questions post-event, please feel free to either contact me via my website, although my stronger recommendation is normally just to send me a tweet, because not only can I respond then, as Louise at The Giddy Teacher will tell you, because I've connected with her for a number of years now, following an event that I did in Yorkshire. If people ask me questions, I'll respond, but I'll give you a retweet to my followers and people that I have as part of my professional learning network will also respond. Education is a force for good. There's far more that unites us than divides us. And we've seen that massively over the course of the last 15 months. And so that just leaves me now really to say, please carry on, continue being safe, enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share it with you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.